And welcome, Birds fans. Philadelphia Eagle fans, are you ready to be covered 365 days a year? Because we plan on doing that for you. This is Birds 365 on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel and accessed via phillyvoice.com. You are looking live at the newest Mac and Mac duo. Yours truly, Jody McDonald, with my partner, John McMullen. We are Birds 365. J-Mac, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Hope everybody had a happy Easter who obviously celebrates. And I'm excited, Jody. I mean, right back to it. It's April. You know what that means. NFL draft month.
And I know we're going to talk plenty about the NFL draft today. Again, for those of you just finding us, well, you were on top of things. You knew that the show was kicking off, getting started today, a new Philadelphia Eagles show for you. Yes, on Bird 365, we're going to talk about the entire National Football League, but with a serious bent toward the hometown team here in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Eagles. John, it's a new day for us. You and I are starting this show, and hopefully we do this for a nice, lengthy period of time, at least 365. We got to get a whole year in.
We got to get 365 in. We got to do that. So
I would think that would be a minimum, but we shall see. I'm like you, very much looking forward to this, except for one thing. I've been here in town for over 30 years. You've been covering them now for a couple of years. There were better days prior to today. As we jump aboard with Birds 365 today, the Philadelphia Eagles are what the record says they are. They're a 4-11-1 team in the midst of a restructuring, as Jeffrey Lurie, the owner, told us during this offseason, which every team has to go through from time to time. No one stays at the top of the mountain where the Eagles were just 3 years ago as Super Bowl champions. No one stays there forever. You go up the mountain, you come back down the mountain. Right now, they are in a bit of a valley, but they need to start to trek back up the mountain. This offseason started as soon as they finished up that last game against the Washington football team with Nate Sudfeld at the helm. Oh, we got plenty to say about that over the course of the next
unstoppable Nate Sudfeld. Can we say that? According to Jeffrey Lurie. But you're right about the cyclical nature of football, Jody. You know, the Patriots maybe tried to keep it going and kept it going as long as anybody, essentially 2+ decades. But yeah, this is what happens in this industry. And you have cycles, you have upturns, you have downticks. And the Eagles are in a transition phase, and that's what Lurie called it. And, you know, I think if you look at it from a 2-year perspective, well, let's be honest, the Eagles are taking their medicine this year from a salary cap standpoint for a couple reasons. Carson Wentz being the most obvious. You and I have discussed that. Jeffrey Lurie took a gulp of $34 million medicine, so that does not taste good, especially in a pandemic year where the salary cap goes in a negative fashion for the first time in NFL history. So they're sort of taking a step back, starting to rebuild, and that's what Howie Roseman did by moving down in the draft, which we'll talk a lot about in the coming weeks. And potentially, this team could have 3 first-round picks in 2022. And Jody, if you make the right decisions in this draft, you could be right back in an upcycle by next season. I think that's the best case scenario.
Let's talk about what Jeff Lurie and Howie Roseman did with this team during the offseason. The biggest move, of course, was, yes, to move away from Carson Wentz. Anyone who reads you on SI and or phillyvoice.com knows your stance. If they listen to me on WIP, they know my stance. If they've heard you and I, when I bring you on my show as a guest, know our stance collectively. But we're playing to a whole new audience today. So we need to kind of lay the groundwork of where we're coming from. Carson Wentz was supposed to be the man. He was supposed to be the franchise quarterback in this town for a decade plus. It didn't work out that way. In your opinion, why? What was the biggest reason that Carson Wentz's era ended as quickly, as early, and as unfriendly as it did here in Philadelphia?
Boy, that was like a perfect storm. It's tough to pick one, and that's why I'm excited. We're going to have my friend Joe Santoliquito on the program here in the first hour in a little bit, because he was the one that sort of first broke sort of the story that everything wasn't all roses with Carson Wentz and the organization, with Carson Wentz and his teammates. So that was part of it. Nick Foles making his run was part of it. Let's be honest. I think Carson Wentz never got over that, and the fact that there's a statue of Nick Foles outside Lincoln Financial Field. Real quick, I always tell this story, Jody, when Jason Peters, who, remember, was injured 2017, that same Super Bowl season, missed essentially half the season, came back the next year. I remember a reporter showing up at training camp and asking JP, how excited are you to go get your own Super Bowl ring? And Jason Peters, who anybody who's ever met him, 6'4", 330 pounds on a good day, stared right through him and said, already got one. Because he knew he was a big part of that team trying to bring along Halapoulivaati Vaitai. I don't think Carson Wentz ever had that feeling, even though he was such a huge part of that Super Bowl championship. They don't win that Super Bowl without Carson Wentz. They're 11-2 when he goes down. They win that game in Los Angeles. That's part of it. And let's be honest, the drafting of Jalen Hurts at 53, that got in Carson Wentz's psyche last year, and he never recovered.
I have to admit that that's something that you had to bring me into. I still don't believe it with the same fervor that you and many other people that cover the Philadelphia Eagles do, that the biggest issue that Carson Wentz had this year was the drafting of Jalen Hurts got in his head. Maybe I'm giving Carson Wentz too much credit. I was a big fan of the player, or have been throughout his entire career, defended him vociferously at the beginning of the year when people started picking on him and the Eagles got off to a slow start. I said, you do realize this guy was a major MVP candidate just a couple of years ago, and you think he's fallen that far off the earth? Well, they were right. I was wrong. But I defended Carson Wentz to the gills on a week-in, week-out basis. I just believed he was tougher than that, and that it would come back around, that the Eagles couldn't be as bad as they were showing. Well, they were, and he was. And the more guys like yourself and others continue to ring the bell of, Carson just didn't understand the Eagles not supporting him the way that he wanted them to, that he was put off by the fact that Jalen Hurts was brought in. And as soon as Jalen Hurts was inserted into the game, which, by the way, and I said this during the season on my show, wherever anybody would listen to me, I think Doug Peterson gave him more rope than he needed to hang himself. That Doug Peterson could have pulled the plug on Carson Wentz earlier than he did. When he did, Carson Wentz has now since told us, he started to immediately think that Philadelphia might not be the place for me and envisioning himself elsewhere. Well, shame on Carson Wentz. They gave you $100 million. If that isn't enough faith in you for you to keep your confidence about you, that's on you. That's not on the Philadelphia. That's not on Doug Peterson. That's on you, Carson. There were reasons that added to Carson's playing as poorly as he did. It wasn't just him by himself in a vacuum. It was the offensive line. It was not enough skill position players. It was questionable play calling at times by Doug Peterson. Yes, all of those things contributed. But the bottom line is, it was your job, Carson. They handed it to you. They handed you $100 million. If that wasn't confidence enough in you, well, then you didn't have enough confidence in yourself. So, yes, I went from being a stout Carson Wentz fan, devotee, and defender to a guy who really questioned him. If you guys have it right, and only Carson knows for sure, and he's never going to admit to it one way or the other, but if Carson couldn't handle the fact that the Eagles used a second-round pick, not a first, a second-round pick on a quarterback, and that got inside his head, that tells me that he's not as tough a player as I thought he was.
I don't disagree with that criticism, Jody, but I do think, if you want to play devil's advocate, if you want to look at the other side and say you understand Carson Wentz, it is rare for an NFL team to do that with a quarterback that is 27 years old. People look at Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay and say he was not happy with Jordan Love, who was a first-round pick. But Aaron is 37, 38 years old. I mean, you do have to start thinking about the next page. Same thing happened with Aaron when Brett Favre was there, and it was the same type situation. Point is, quarterbacks are never happy. And I always, there's this quarterback, a CFL quarterback named Bo Levi Mitchell, and he was a CFL star. And when I covered the Minnesota Vikings, the Vikings wanted to bring him in to be a potential backup quarterback to Kirk Cousins. And I'll never forget this because, Bo came in, did the typical rah-rah, I'm here to compete. I want to do everything to push Kirk Cousins. And the Vikings said, whoa, whoa, whoa. We don't want you here for that. We want you to be a good soldier in the locker room. We want you to support the starting quarterback. We don't want you to create one wave. That is the typical sentiment in the NFL, believe it or not. And that happened, especially with a star quarterback, especially with a quarterback that you paid $130 million to, essentially, 128 with that 4-year extension. So it is rare to sign a quarterback to that type of extension, and all of a sudden, less than 2 calendar years later, you're drafting another quarterback, and you go out and say, he's a top-tier talent. He's got a chance to be a star quarterback in this league. We're the quarterback factory, blah, blah, blah. It is very rare. I could not come up with a comparison. It hasn't happened in over 40, 50 years in the NFL.
Understood, but teams are allowed to run their franchise the way they want to.
Sure.
And the Eagles decided that this was a good move. I know I was in the major minority who actually liked the draft. I thought that Hurts was a borderline first-round talent, for late first, early second. The Eagles got him in the mid-second round, which I thought was value at the time. I had no issues with it. They had no backup quarterback on the roster, unless you consider the great Nate Sudfeld a backup quarterback. They needed a backup quarterback. Backup quarterbacks are getting paid pretty good money. Oh, by the way, see what the Eagles paid for Joe Flacco this offseason. They could have gotten Jalen Hurts for cheaper than that, and you've got a guy who could potentially be on the improve, getting better, rather than a backup quarterback. Joe Flacco now is what he is, and I do want to ask about Joe Flacco, who said he's coming in here to compete. Oh, my God, Jalen Hurts must be shaking in his boots because the other quarterback is saying he wants to compete. I hope Jalen Hurts is no Carson Wentz in that way. But they paid more for Flacco than they did for Hurts this past year.
Yep.
So Carson Wentz had to be able to deal with that. He had to understand that. He didn't, and that's why he's now in Indianapolis Colts. Since we went there, let me ask you about the Joe Flacco backup quarterback signing. I'm a Jet guy, like the Jets, watch the Jets, watch all their games either live or on tape thereafter. Saw Flacco play several games this year because Darnold was hurt. Didn't know if he had anything left in the tank when the Jets signed him as their backup quarterback. He actually showed me a little something. He's still got a very strong arm. He, too, was playing with understaffed offense the same way Sam Darnold did during the year. I thought he looked fine as a backup quarterback. In my eyes, that's all that he is anymore, despite his saying he's coming in here to compete. I don't think there is going to be much of a competition. I think it's going to be Jalen Hurts' job. I was a little surprised at the amount of money that they had to pay him because he was coming off being a guy who was basically out of the league and just looking for a job. I know he's healthy coming in this year, which he wasn't last year for the Jets, and that's why the Jets were able to pay him as little as they did to get a backup quarterback. Did you like the signing? Will it work for the Eagles? Is Flacco a good guy to have as a backup to Jalen Hurts this year?
I do like the signing. I think it's the best you can hope for as a veteran backup. But Joe Flacco's won a lot in this league, and you hit the nail on the head, Jody. The Jets got him at a discount because nobody knew if he was healthy. And that's what he was able to do. Even though he didn't have success, he was able to prove to the rest of the league that he was healthy, and you could count on him from that standpoint. All of a sudden, we know free agency, supply and demand. Well, the San Francisco 49ers were looking at bringing him in as a backup. So all of a sudden, you have competition, that price goes up, and you have to pay him a little bit more money. But you also bring up, it's very interesting to me that people who say Carson Wentz should embrace competition are criticizing Joe Flacco for saying, I want to compete. you know, a lot of the same people are saying, what are you doing, Joe? You saw the criticism, Jody. So part of it is, you know, just lip service. Jalen Hurts is going to be the starting quarterback of this team. But Joe Flacco is a veteran quarterback who's won a Super Bowl, who's won 10, I think, postseason games. The most impressive thing to me about Joe Flacco is he had a stretch of 5 consecutive years and 6 out of 7, Jody, where he won a playoff game. So that's consistency, not got to the playoffs. Like Andy Dalton had that run 6 straight years in Cincinnati where he made the playoffs. Joe Flacco won a playoff game every single year. That's really difficult to do. So he knows how to win at a high level. If you need him, you know, if Jalen has a high ankle sprain, he's going to miss a couple weeks. I think he can go out and win you a couple games, and that's all you want from a backup quarterback.
A lot of things about Joe Flacco I like, and I think will serve the Eagles well. I'm with you. I don't really think there's a competition, but if he wants to say that, it shouldn't have Jalen Hurts shaking in his boots, because I don't think it's going to be much of a competition.
And I don't think it does, by the way. Different personalities. Jalen Hurts doesn't have the same personality as Carson Wentz, but, Jody, I will say, this is the team of emotional intelligence. How does Jeffrey Lurie, how does Howie Roseman not look at the human nature aspect of this, do everything in a vacuum, like these guys are assets, like they don't have feelings, like they don't have personalities. You're going to throw emotional intelligence at me. You better show some emotional intelligence.
No, they certainly read Carson Wentz wrong. But I can't really give him that hard a time, because I read him wrong too. I thought he was a tough-natured competitor, and I don't believe that is the case now. And best of luck in Indianapolis, Carson. Do us a favor, stay healthy, because we need you to stay healthy.
75%. Yeah.
So that second-round pick does become a first-round pick going forward for the Birds. The only thing that scares me about Flacco, last thing, and then we'll punch up our first guest here in a second. The one thing that Flacco doesn't bring to the table, certainly that Jalen Hurts does, is mobility. He is a statue. There are pocket quarterbacks, and then there are statues. And at this stage of his career, Joe Flacco is an unquestioned statue. They're going to design an offense that is going to best fit Jalen Hurts. And if and when Jalen Hurts is out of the lineup, has an injury, needs to be subbed out for, and Joe Flacco's going in, they're going to have to tinker the offense. They're going to have to change it. They're going to have to be able to put something else in on the fly. It's nice when your two quarterbacks have a similar type of game, that their strengths and things that they do are of the same ilk. It just makes it easier on the offensive coordinator with a whole new coaching staff, new offense being put in. They're going to basically, as far as I'm concerned, put in 2 offenses, one that's going to run when Hurts is in there, one that hopefully doesn't have to be run often, but if it does, Joe Flacco's in there. They need to be 2 different offenses, do they not?
Yeah, it's a good point, Jody. You'd like to have a similar skill set with your backup quarterback, and it's completely different. But I got to tell you, Nick Sirianni, first time we mentioned the new head coach, look, he has pointed to his time in Indianapolis and said, we had 3 different quarterbacks. We had Andrew Luck, we had Jacoby Brissett, we had Phillip Rivers, all different skill sets. We changed the offense for him. So he is championing that as one of his skills, one of his top skills as being a coach in this league. So he and Shane Steichen and everybody else on that coaching staff needs to be in that position. I will say this. I'd rather have a good backup quarterback than a bad backup quarterback that has a similar skill set as the starter.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. That's why we both like the Flacco signing. All right, we've already talked about Carson Wentz. Our first guest, our next guest, a.k.a. our first guest, is a guy who kind of opened people's eyes about Carson Wentz, his relationship with some of the guys in the locker room. A whole bunch of Eagle fans were none too pleased when he put up the questions that he did about Carson and his relationship with his teammates. We'll go into it with him. We'll back it up and give him some credit, because it seems like the reporting he did and the sources that he had were pretty darn accurate. He covers the Eagles as well for PhillyVoice.com. Joe Santaliquito will be the first guest of the Mac and Mac guys here on Birds 365, and he joins us next.
Football in Philadelphia is a lifestyle, a passion from birth, and a personal responsibility to know the game. Boo when necessary, and think about Eagles! Every second of every minute of every hour of every day. Birds 365 was created for you. Jody Mack, the legendary sports talker, joins forces with NFL insider John McMullen. Birds 365. Start your morning with Johnny Mack and Jody Mack across the JAKIB Media Network. Watch it live on YouTube.